He had just returned from a long business trip, ready to step back into the quiet luxury of his own home. But before he could even unlock the front door, flashing lights filled the driveway and strangers shouted his name. The accusation that he was breaking into a mansion he had owned for years, and the person who called the cops. She'd been living there uninvited for 2 weeks. What unfolded next wasn't just shocking, it was a disturbing reminder of how quickly prejudice can turn comfort into chaos. This wasn't about a property dispute. It was about perception, power, and the dangerous speed at which a lie can become truth. The question is, how do you prove you belong in your own home? For Marcus Hill, life had finally reached a place of hard-earned peace. At 42, he had built his success from the ground up, starting as a college dropout, working double shifts at a warehouse and delivering pizzas on weekends just to keep the lights on. Over the years, he clawed his way into real estate, flipping rundown houses, making risky investments others avoided, and slowly moving from survival to stability. 2 years ago, his relentless work paid off. He purchased his dream, a sprawling mansion in an exclusive, gated community where every lawn looked sculpted. Every street was lined with silent cameras, and every home stood as a quiet monument to wealth. For Marcus, it wasn't just a house, it was proof that every sacrifice, every late night, and every time he'd been told no had been worth it. That summer, Marcus had been away on a business trip overseas, chasing the final steps of a high-stakes deal he'd been negotiating for months. The return flight was long and exhausting, but as he drove through the quiet streets that night, a wave of comfort settled over him. The familiar glow of street lamps reflected of polished sidewalks, and the gated entrance had opened for him without question. It felt like home. It felt safe. But then something shifted. As he turned onto his street, his eyes caught on the blinds in his front windows. They were half open. Marcus never left them that way. A dim, unfamiliar light glowed from inside, and his driveway, usually empty, now had a dark SUV parked dead center as if it belonged there. He slowed, confusion turning to unease. Maybe a neighbor had stopped by. Maybe it was maintenance. But inside that house, someone else had already decided who he was, and they were dialing the police. Marcus pulled his Tesla into the driveway, his headlights sweeping over the strange SUV as if to confirm it was real. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. The security lights along the roof flickered on, bathing the property in a pale glow. He reached for his phone, debating whether to call the HOA or security, but something in his gut told him to check things for himself. The moment he stepped out, the cool night air hit him, carrying the faint scent of fresh-cut grass, a smell he normally loved. Tonight, it felt out of place, almost haunting. The sound of muffled movement came from inside, like someone walking with purpose. His heart rate picked up. Marcus approached the front door, pulling his keys from his pocket. But before he could slide the key into the lock, the door opened just a crack. A woman's face appeared, framed by messy blonde hair, eyes wide and sharp. She was in her late 40s, wearing a robe like she owned the place. Her voice came fast and cold. "Can I help you?" Marcus froze for a second, thrown by the absurdity of the question. "This is my house," he said, steady but firm. She laughed a short, dismissive sound and shook her head. "Not anymore. I've been here for 2 weeks, and you need to leave before I call the police." He almost thought it was some bizarre prank. But when she shut the door in his face, the reality landed heavy. She wasn't bluffing. She was inside his home, claiming it, acting as if he were the intruder. Marcus's first instinct was to pull up the deed on his phone, proof that he'd bought this place outright. But before he could, the distant wail of sirens cut through the night. His stomach dropped. They weren't far, somewhere between the time he parked and the moment she closed the door. She'd called the cops, and from the sound of it, they were already on their way. He stepped back, glancing up and down the quiet street. Curtains in neighboring houses twitched. Porch lights flicked on. He could feel the weight of invisible eyes pressing into him, measuring him, deciding who he was before. A single question was asked when the squad car screeched to a stop in front of the driveway. 2 officers jumped out. Their flashlights hit his face instantly, blinding him. "Step away from the property," one of them shouted. Marcus's voice caught in his throat. He held up his hands. "I live here, don't move." The command was sharp enough to make his chest tighten. One wrong gesture, one misread moment, and this could spiral into something far worse. He stayed still, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. The woman Karen, though he didn't know her name yet, emerged from the front door with a look of perfect victimhood. Her robe was pulled tight, her arms crossed, and her voice trembled as she pointed toward Marcus. That's him. He tried to break in. Marcus's jaw clenched. He wanted to shout, to demand they check his ID, to prove who he was. But he knew how quickly situations like this could turn. His skin color had already spoken louder than any evidence he could show. One officer stepped between Marcus and the house, hand hovering over his holster. The other took Karen's statement, nodding along as if the story was already written, and then just when Marcus thought it couldn't get worse, Karen produced a set of keys. His keys. The officer turned toward Marcus. Sir, we're going to need you to come with us. The world tilted. His home, his safety, his very identity were being rewritten right in front of him. And the night wasn't even close to over. The officer's words rang in Marcus's ears. Sir, we're going to need you to come with us. He stood frozen, the cold night air suddenly heavy, like it was pressing down on his chest. His own driveway, once a symbol of safety, felt like enemy territory. The squad car's lights pulsed red and blue across the pristine neighborhood, painting him in colors he knew too well. Suspicion and danger. He tried again, forcing the words out. This is my property. My name is Marcus Hill. I have my ID in my wallet. And don't reach for anything. The first officer snapped, his tone cutting like glass. Marcus stopped mid-motion, his palms instinctively rising higher. Every muscle in his arms ached from holding them up, but he didn't dare move. The flashlight stayed locked on his face, bright enough to make his eyes water. Karen's voice cut through the tense air like a blade. I told you he was aggressive. He came right up to the door, demanding to come inside. I feared for my life. Her performance was flawless, breathless, quivering, clutching her robe tighter as if to shield herself from danger. She glanced toward the cluster of neighbors now gathering on their lawns, their silhouettes framed by porch lights. Phones were raised, recording, not to help, but to witness. Marcus's voice trembled not with fear, but with the effort of holding his fury. Back. Check the deed. Call the HOA. My name is on everything. I own this house. The second officer didn't even glance his way. Sir, you're trespassing. She's been living here for 2 weeks. We've got witnesses who can confirm that. Witnesses. Of course. The neighbors. They'd seen her around, assumed she belonged. His absence had given her story the perfect cover. The first officer stepped closer, hand resting on his holstered gun. Turn around. Hands behind your back. The click of the handcuffs was deafening. Cold steel bit into his wrists, Marcus felt. The heat of humiliation flashed his skin, not just because he was being arrested in front of his own home, but because the entire scene was drenched in a truth he had lived with his whole life. No matter the zip code, the job title, or the price of the house, his blackness made him suspect before he could ever be seen as victim. As the officers led him toward the squad car, he caught sight of his front door still ajar. From inside, Karen stood just beyond the threshold, smiling. It wasn't wide or obvious, but it was there, a curl at the corner of her mouth. Satisfaction in her eyes. It hit him harder than the cuffs. She wasn't afraid of being caught. She knew the system would protect her. Marcus's knees threatened to give way as they guided his head down to fit him into the back seat. The smell of worn vinyl filled his nose, mingled with the faint scent of pepper spray and sweat. His mansion loomed just a few yards away, unreachable, as though it had already been stolen in full. The door slammed shut beside him, sealing him in. Through the tinted glass, he could see the neighbors dispersing, the show over for now. But a few lingered, shaking their heads not in disbelief at the injustice, but as if the evening's disruption had been a nuisance. The engine rumbled to life. The red and blue reflections slid across Karen's face one last time before they pulled away. She wasn't just in his home, she was winning. Marcus stared ahead, his jaw tight. He didn't know how yet, but this wasn't over. They could take him from his driveway tonight, but the truth would come out, and when it did, it wouldn't just clear his name, it would expose them all. Marcus spent the night in a holding cell. No charges were filed, at least. Not yet, but the damage had already been done. Hours of explaining, of proving, of calling his attorney just to get someone to check public records and confirm the deed was in his name. It should have been over in minutes. Instead, it took almost an entire day before the officers reluctantly admitted a misunderstanding had occurred, but even then, there was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd put him through, just a curt release and instructions. to take it up with the courts if he wanted the woman removed from his property. When Marcus finally returned to his neighborhood, the humiliation deepened. Word had spread. Some neighbors avoided his eyes, others stared too long, curiosity mixing with judgment. His own home was now a crime scene in their minds, not because of the squatter, but because of him. Getting Karen out wasn't simple. Squatter laws and legal loopholes meant weeks of hearings, police reports, and attorney fees. She claimed tenancy rights, argued she'd been invited by someone who lived there, and painted herself as the one under threat. And through it all, Marcus had to remain composed because one raised voice, one angry outburst, could undo everything. Eventually, the court ordered her removal. On the day she left, she walked past Marcus with a smirk, clutching boxes she'd filled with things from his home. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Marcus stepped inside and looked around. Everything was technically back to the way it was: his furniture, his walls, his photographs, but the feeling of safety was gone. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a reminder, in a single night, everything he had worked for could be stripped away, not because of a crime he committed, but because of the assumptions people made about the color of his skin. The experience left more than a legal bill. It left a scar. Marcus knew his story wasn't unique. Across the country, headlines kept telling the same tale in different words: homeowners accused of trespassing, shoppers accused of stealing, professionals mistaken for criminals. Different places, different faces, but the same pattern. The system didn't just fail Marcus. It was never built to protect him in the first place. For some, this might just be one bad encounter or a misunderstanding. But for Marcus and for millions of others, it's part of a lifetime of warnings, of calculated self-control, of always having to prove you belong in spaces you've already earned. As Marcus stood in the middle of his living room that night, the silence felt heavier than before. He thought about every time he'd told himself it was getting better, that progress was being made. Yet here he was, cuffed in his own driveway only days before, while the real trespasser was treated as a victim. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about what it meant to be black in a place where even ownership wasn't enough to guarantee dignity or safety. And maybe that's the question we should all be asking. If the law, the neighbors, and the police can erase your right to your own home in an instant, do you truly own anything at all?